Okay, guys, so we're going to solve some rational equations here. I'm going to lead out on this problem by factoring out all my denominators so that we can then make common denominators after that. Okay, so I've written out the factored out form of this, and from here, what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and list excluded values before we go any further. Okay, remember, excluded values are anything that makes your denominator equal to 0. So according to this piece, we've got x plus 6, which means my excluded value is x for -6, okay? And then just plain x's by themselves, like these x squareds or the plain x in the middle, would be 0, okay? So what I'm going to go ahead and note here with my excluded values, my EVs, is saying that there can't be an answer where x is -6 or x is 0. Those answers are extraneous. They would get invalidated as we progress through this. Okay. Now, the next step is going to be to make common denominators. Okay. So you'll notice the first denominator and the last denominator are already matching. So the good news is we're not going to have to do anything to manipulate those. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply to make this middle piece match the other two. So I already have one x, so I'm going to multiply by another x to get me x squared and an x plus 6. So now by multiplying this, I'm also going to multiply it up here. And let's rewrite what we have now, okay? So x plus 3, x squared plus x plus 6 plus x plus 6, x squared, x plus 6 equals 3, x squared, x plus 6. Okay, so now that all of our denominators are matching, we're ready to kind of get rid of those denominators. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to this statement as a whole, I'm just going to multiply x squared, x plus 6. Now note, this is to both sides. Okay, and all this is going to do is it's going to serve the same purpose all the way throughout. It's just going to cancel all of my denominators out. Okay. And now that we've done this, we have something that's much more manageable. X plus 3 plus x times x plus 6 equals 3. Let's distribute some of this. Okay, x plus 3, x squared plus 6x equals 3. Okay, and we're going to clean this up by moving everything to the same side. And we end up with something that's fairly simple. X squared plus 7x equals to 0. Okay, now let's go ahead and solve this by factoring. Okay, so if you factor this piece, you get something like this. X times x plus 7 equals 0, and you get x equals 0 and x equals -7. But wait, before you lock those two answers in, remember your excluded values from up here. You told me 0 and -6 cannot be valid answers here. So this solution is going to be deemed extraneous, okay? And your only solution that works will be -7. Okay, so let's take a look at another equation. So hopefully you kind of have the steps down like we did last time. Let's lead out by factoring. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and factor these denominators. I'm hoping these look pretty familiar to you at this point. Okay, so here is my factored form of the equation. And again, what I'm going to go ahead and do is list my excluded values. So in this case, we've got excluded values of x should not be allowed to equal 4, and x should not be -4. Okay, so remember, if you get either of those answers, make sure you throw them out. Okay, all right, let's go ahead and start by making common denominators. So I'm going to take my first fraction and multiply it by n minus 4, top and bottom. And again, don't bother distributing out stuff on the bottom. Leave that all alone until the end when you're solving your problem. Here's our factored out form. And again, essentially what happens is these denominators, now that they are all the same, will get canceled out. Okay, we are going to multiply the whole thing by n plus 4, n minus 4. And remember that is going to cancel out all of our denominators. And we're left with something much simpler. N plus 2, n minus 4, minus 6 equals to 1. Okay, and just be careful about this part, guys. Remember, we have to FOIL this together. N squared minus 2n minus 8 minus 6 equals to 1. Put everything together. N squared minus 2n minus 15. And then now let's factor it and solve it. So numbers that multiply to negative 15, let's use negative 5 and 3. Okay, and then again, box method grouping, whatever really works for you. Okay, you should get to n minus 5, n plus 3 is equal to 0. So you will get solutions n equals 5 and n equals negative 3. Okay, so now let's take a look at a rational inequality. Okay, so an inequality is of course greater than or less than. Okay, and to solve an inequality, you were going to have to get it to be compared against 0. So basically, we're going to start by moving everything to the same side, lead out by subtracting 3 from both sides. So my expression will look something like this: negative x minus 44 over 2x minus 10 minus 3, and I'm leaving a little bit of room because I'm going to say it's 3 over 1, less than or equal to 0. Now, next major step is going to be to combine these two together, so of course we need common denominators. Let's multiply our second fraction by 2x minus 10 on top and bottom. And we get something like this: negative x minus 44 over 2x minus 10 minus 6x minus 30 over 2x minus 10 is less than or equal to 0. Okay, if we simplify this, we'll get something. Let's make sure we distribute this out. So distribute our negative sign, negative 7x minus 14 over 2x minus 10 less than or equal to 0. I'm going to factor this so it's easy to see what our critical values are going to be. So we'll have x plus 2 on top, and on bottom we're going to have 2x minus 5, and we're going to have that less than or equal to 0. Okay, so in this situation, we have two critical numbers. Our critical numbers are going to be from the denominator 5 and from the numerator negative 2. So I'm going to come to my number line for my solution set. Here's my number line, and I'm going to mark negative 2 and 5. And what I want to do is now test these intervals to figure out which one of them is below 0. Now, before we get into testing and stuff, let's go ahead and make sure we have our dots right. So since this is less than or equal to, the negative 2 is going to have a filled in circle. However, your 5 is an open circle because this one comes from the denominator, okay? So I'll make a note here. This one is an open circle. This one is closed. Do this before you start solving for the rest of it. That way you don't make any mistakes and accidentally mess up where you put this. Okay, so let's test it out. The easiest number to plug in, of course, is 0. A number less than negative 2, maybe negative 3. And if we plug in, let's say 6. Okay, again, I'm not going to calculate the numbers out here. I'm actually just trying to figure out what the sign is. So if I plug in negative 3, and I do negative 3 plus 2, and on bottom I have 2, negative 3 minus 5. If you plug this in, your answer comes out to be a negative number, okay? And really all that matters is that it's a negative. We don't care that it is 7 over 16 or whatever it is. We really just care about that sign, okay? If we plug in 0, okay, we are going to get a positive answer this time. So it would look like this: negative 7, 0 plus 2 over 2, 0 minus 5, get a positive answer, okay? And if you plug in 6, very similarly, you're going to end up with a negative answer this time. Okay, so it equals a negative. Like I said, we don't really care about the numbers. We just care about where it's negative. Okay, and since we are less than 0, okay, again, that less than is coming in now. It's going to represent these sections on the outside where I got negative answers. Okay, so how will I write my solution now? Let's make that statement. Negative infinity until this point right here, -2, bracket, and then on the other side we've got 5 going towards infinity. Okay, note I used that parentheses for that open circle, and that is my solution set. Okay, so make sure that you set up your number line and are doing your interval tests so that you can get this. Okay, so on this one, guys, again, same as the previous one, we're going to make it compare to 0 first, right? So let's move that 1 over, and then we're going to kind of use the same process. Okay, again, we're less than 0. Cool, no problem. Let's make our 1 into x plus 6 over x plus 6, 2x plus 18. And if I combine this, I will get 3x plus 24 over x plus 6, and it's less than or equal to 0. All right. Now, again, let's factor and find our critical values. So from the top, I'm just going to take out my GCF and find there's an x plus 8 and x plus 6 in the denominator. Okay, so what are my critical numbers? We're going to have -8 from the numerator. Okay. Oops. And -6 from down here. Okay. So again, these are referred to as critical numbers. They are just numbers that are important to the problem. They are not the actual solutions themselves, okay? So this is a critical number. Okay, so with this now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up our number line and solve this. So here's my number line. This one's a little bit weird because there's not actually very much between -8 and -6. Note, -8 is less than -6, so make sure you put it on the left side. I'm going to go ahead and mark these off as well with our symbols. So since -8 came from the numerator, I can use a filled in circle there for that with the equals, right? And the denominator is always going to have an open circle, okay? So note, this is because this one was from the denominator. And because you can't divide by 0, that one's going to keep an open circle. Okay, let's test our regions to see which ones we want. Remember, if we're less than 0, we want a negative region. So let's plug in maybe -9, -7, and of course the best number, 0. Okay, let's start with kind of the easiest one. And again, I want to kind of stress the fact that we don't really care what the number is. We just care about what the signs are. Okay, so if I give you 3 times 0 plus 8 is a positive number, it's +8. And then on bottom, 0 plus 6 is another positive number. So this answer is a positive. So this entire section is positive. Okay, let's take a look at the middle section. If you have 3 and you say, hey, -7 plus 8 is a positive number, it's +1. And then -7 plus 6 is just -1. Okay, so what happens? A positive divided by a negative. I get that this section is negative. Okay, and then -9, you'll get 3. -9 plus 8 is a negative number, and -9 plus 6 is a negative number. So you're going to get this section is a positive, right? Remember, because we are less than 0, we want the negative sections, right? So in this case, the negative section is right here in the middle. Okay, so I'm going to write it like this: bracket -8, -6 with a parentheses. And that is my solution for this inequality. Hopefully these problems helped you out. So good luck and happy studying, guys.